Evening and welcome to the work session, meeting of the Richmond Community Schools Board of School Trustees. And if you would all please start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so very much. If we could also have the reading of our mission statement, please.
Richmond Community Schools guides students on pathways of learning to a future of limitless possibilities.
And our vision statement.
Richmond Community Schools, a community nurturing mind, body, and spirit to prepare students for lives of choice, purpose, and service.
Thank you very much. And right off the top, we have a public session of public commentary. No one has signed up, so we'll move on to our consent agenda.
Okay, our consent items this evening are 3.01, our approval of minutes, 3.02, human resources, and then 3.03, the Richmond Art Museum settlement agreement.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the consent items?
I'll move to approve the consent items.
Okay, motion from Jeff Slifer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Aaron Stevens. Any comments or questions on any of those?
I have some comments. I'm pleased that we agreed to settle with the RAM. I actually even kind of hate the word settlement because they've been such a good partner to us. But
Well, it actually started a long time ago.
well, yeah, I think they did like $1.7, $1.8 million in work, and for them to ask us to assist with a small amount of the asbestos, I think that was
Agree.
a smart move on our part. So.
I agree with that. Anyone else? All right, all those in favor of approving the consent items as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
None opposed. And our action items.
Okay, our first action item this evening is 4.01, and that is our non-bargaining member salary schedule. My recommendation is that the Board of School Trustees approves the salary schedules, increases, and benefit packages updated as presented in board docs.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve that salary schedule?
So move.
Motion from Dixie Robinson, do I have a second? Second from Jeff Slifer. Any comments or questions on that?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate who, I assume it was Jennifer. It's easy to read, easy to understand, scrambling through all kinds of stuff. It's very, very well laid out.
Well, I will tell you, Jennifer and Karen and Rob even got in on some of that, so they did a lot of time looking at screens and comparing stuff, so thanks to
Still
that.
would like to have read strike-throughs, that type of stuff would make it easier to
Straight.
see what's changed.
But at least you can read it quickly now and get it.
Very good.
Everyone look at Jeff and say, boo.
Anybody else? Okay, all those in favor of approving the non-bargaining member salary schedule as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Okay, our next action item this evening is 4.02, our DC overnight field trip. I'm going to ask Dr. Reynolds if he would speak to that, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Terrell. I bring before the board this evening the 8th grade field trip, the traditional 8th grade field trip to Washington, D.C., May 13th through the 17th. The schedule, the 4-day schedule, 5-day schedule is attached. Again, looks like a terrific opportunity. They're ready to go with some fundraisers and look forward to another great year and another great trip to D.C.
Have you purchased your butter braid? That's
Yes.
the key, because I'm
Great,
pretty
yes.
sure that was about DC, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Raspberry.
Okay, mine was blueberry, I think. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the DC overnight trip for 8th graders as presented?
I move to approve the DC overnight field trip.
Okay, motion from Aaron Stevens. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Brad Walton. No further comments or questions?
Question.
Yes.
Just to clarify to the public again, how do we ensure that all students who want to go, who may not meet financial means, that are able to go? And if not, how can we help?
Right. So one thing that the schools do is not only just fundraise a lot, so they will have something every month from now until the trip. The kids can participate in those fundraisers, as well as any local businesses or individuals who would just like to donate. Those donations are welcome. They are twofold. So one, you can donate individually to a specific child, or you can just offer a donation and they will spread that as evenly as possible to any kid who needs it. So we do welcome donations. If you have any questions on that, please feel free to contact Dennis or Test or Hibbard, or my office is always happy to help as well.
When, like you said, every month there's an opportunity for fundraising, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And there's different kinds, so there's plenty of
Right.
opportunities to raise the dollars.
Right.
Very cool.
Well, and there's so many memories built with the kids on this trip. And you still see kids that went on that trip and still talk about it and remember it and what they did and all that.
That is
So
one of those.
it's a great opportunity for kids to be able to go and.
As long as we keep them out of the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
They will learn bad habits
All
there,
that.
yeah.
You don't want them to be the smartest ones in there.
Goodness, we better stop while we're ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
So, that's okay.
There'll be a commercial.
All those, that's coming. All those in favor of approving the DC overnight field trip signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Awesome.
Okay, 4.03 is our contracts for our bond projects, and I'm gonna ask Mr. Tidrow if you would speak to that, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Terrell. This relates to the bond projects that were created by the Projects Committee by the school board at a previous meeting, but the recommendation is that the Board of School Trustees approve the professional services contracts for LWC Incorporated and Fannie Howie Associates Incorporated for the bond projects as presented.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve these contracts?
I move to approve the bond contracts as presented.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second it.
Okay. Any comments or questions?
I do. I just, I've made my feelings known through email. Just want to emphasize again that I would have loved to have seen these go as one instead of two to help with the cohesiveness and continuity throughout this whole project. And I just want my opinion out there and to be shown in record, so.
Okay. Anybody else?
We started to get into an email discussion about this, and this is a rather difficult subject, a deep subject to have a discussion via email, but I guess I still had some questions about the scopes and stuff like that. I just want to make sure that whether it's at the project level, committee level, and or the board or whatever, I just want to make sure that we stay on top of it and stay involved with it. It's kind of unusual not to include construction services, so or project management in it, and we're going to take that on ourselves. I mean, I had mentioned maybe using someone like Ron Mays to do that, or someone to have that kind of experience, but since we're going to handle that in-house, that's fine. But if you look at the billing rates per hour for either firm, it's going to be, I mean, they're both professional firms, so, I mean, it's not going to be, I don't expect much difference between one firm or the other as far as how they bill hourly or how they break it down and how they get paid for reimbursed expenses. I just, we just need to be careful, because we very easily could have, the way the contracts are written, we could easily get a $30,000 extra bill, because every time they show up additional at our request, it's billable.
I see.
So, I just putting it out there that we need to monitor that. We need to stay involved. We may need to have some individual project level kind of discussions to talk about scopes. I mean, they're the professionals. They can design what we tell them.
Right.
But if you read the scopes, they're pretty vague.
And before we get to the
Before-
project phase, that's when you're talking
Right,
about
we need
going
to-
into more detail.
we haven't discussed, is the elevator for the attendance center, inside or outside? You know, there's so many different, you know, student centers,
Yep,
media centers.
sure.
What's that mean? What's in it?
And that's where I wish we could have had more project committee meetings before this was brought to recommendation. It probably would have had a lot of my answers, or my questions answered, sorry, and made me feel a lot better about moving forward here. I just have.
So talk about the next step, maybe that will help us. What is the next step? Once this,
Well, the next phase is just like any other project we've done like this, is we approve the contracts, and then we get to the point where they get to the design and phase where they build the document for the bids, and at that point, the board will have, you know, opportunity to look at those designs and approve them, or have input on those designs.
well, there's already been some conversation. Elevators are a really perfect example. We talk about where, which location, what type of elevator, what's the most primary use for it. So, and we've already, several of us have already said that, so I think that's the next.
Yeah.
And maybe
And-
it's, I mean, before even,
During our conversations with each group, and we met with all of them. Fannie and Howie had already been on site for their walkthroughs and so forth, so they were still very familiar with all of our buildings. But we had phone conversations with them at LWC, Mays Design. We spent time with them, with our maintenance managers, talked about each project in length, and then LWC came back and did some walkthroughs of things. Dennis Roof, for example, they had some questions about that. We talked about each of the projects in length, so, and even talked about, say, the elevator, because we pulled out the plans from the original Tiernan Center build to look at. There was not a shaft put in, but there was talk of possibly putting an elevator in the area over there by the women's restroom on the first floor, where we eventually put in a concession stand. So there was talk about, could we redesign that back to what it was originally talked about doing? Again, no shaft put in there yet, but you know, maybe an open area originally. So, and even, well, what if we put it down the corridor on that kind of northeast side, second floor, where the original weight room was that had to be abandoned? Or could it be outside? Could it be attached to the outside of the building, maybe on that west side, so when it lets off on the second floor, there's some area there in that northwest corner where it would not encroach on the track or the basketball courts or handball courts and so forth, so.
okay.
And, you know.
And that's my encouragement is, and you said just a few minutes ago what I'm kind of worried about. I don't want to wait for us to be involved until after the design is done, because then it's going to cost us to go back and change the design. I kind of want to be apprised and know before the design hits the table for bidding or approval what it is, you know. So, which is a little different than what's done in the past. Typically, you know, a project comes, we don't even usually have a set of blueprints here, and we usually approve it and we move on. And this one I'd like to have a little bit more involvement in, and because we're going to have other expenses, paving the bus garage. I can't imagine that they're not going to have some kind of a survey for water runoff, a geotech type of survey, so that's going to be an additional expense. So, but it'd just be nice to be in the front of the project instead at the end of it.
Mr. Cross?
I was just commenting, my understanding of architectural contracts, and I've got a few years' experience on it, I think the opportunity for the board's input is, as Member Slifer says, is at the conceptual design phase. And if you don't like the concept being proposed, then you go back, and that should not cost more. I mean, it's their job to design to the concepts that you articulate. It's not always realistic to be able to do that in advance of retaining the design professional. In fact, my experience is that very little of that happens.
Yeah.
But it is at that conceptual design phase before you get to the next phase, which is your construction documents and then the bid documents, and then if necessary, the construction activity monitoring. And I thought it was a fairly intelligent way that we scoped the architectural services, because the simpler projects that Rob feels his people can monitor the construction in-house, the paving, the Dennis roof. I mean, roofs don't even necessarily have to have designs, depending on the scope of the roof. Obviously, this one probably does.
A little more extensive. Yes.
But if we want that assistance, and it's available on an hourly rated basis, and I would note the LWCU hourly rates are quite reasonable compared to the ones I've seen from some of the Indianapolis firms. So I thought it was a very effective job of seeking the services of professional design.
Well, maybe I should reword the conceptual phase. I mean, I understand about once it gets to the bidding documents, at that point, we should already be in
At that
agreement.
point, if we change things, we gotta go back.
Right, and we should already be in agreement at that point, I would think, so.
So maybe just making sure that we have a little bit of the conversation regarding those things that you're talking about that aren't yet settled.
And there's certainly still a role
Some
for the
point.
project committee if the board wants to delegate
makes
that, or the
sense.
full board in that
Project
conceptual
committee
design
makes sense.
phase.
So, yeah.
Well, and I was just gonna say, on something like the elevator, I hope we'll talk to the people who would actually use it, because we don't know what kind of equipment gets moved up and down, what kind of weather, if it's an outside, when equipment is moved
But
up or
it
down.
would be bricked in, I mean,
Yeah, but anyway, but room enough to, I mean, like if you're taking, and I don't know what they do, I have no idea.
Goals,
That's why we should
chairs,
talk to
whatever,
them.
yeah.
If you take a balance beam, you gotta have room.
yeah.
You know, there's gotta be,
Right, freight elevator versus
Yeah.
person elevator.
Well, that's why, that's one reason we wanted to include, like, our maintenance manager, John Hamilton. He knows everything that needs to go up there. One is the lift. You've seen the lift that goes
Oh,
up
of
40
course,
feet in
the
the air. Need it to be sized for that. When it's folded down, you can, you know, if it's big enough, if the freight elevator's big enough, you could put that on there and not have 8 guys carrying it up the steps, so.
And I guess, I mean, little things like that we can get into later on, but like through this whole deal, I kind of thought my vision of when I brought it up originally to even include it in this was a larger freight elevator that would be nice enough to double as personnel.
Personnel, right.
Right.
Yes.
So.
And that was that's the discussions we've had with the architects is, here's what we want, and, you know, they have their viewpoint on what the cost may be. One pointed out, hey, we're not in that business, but I think the budget may not be high enough. Other ones thought, well, maybe we could probably do it at that, you know, but have it so it's designed for, we definitely want personnel. That would be I think the main reason I would think that we'd want an elevator. But then if we could afford it and it could fit in our budget, go with that freight. Because we do use that second floor for a lot of things that we have a lot of heavy lifting to look at, so.
yeah.
Okay, well, let's move forward. Let's just make sure we engage.
So if we would table the discussion, or hold off on 2 weeks before we approve this, what would the ramifications of that be?
Well, I guess first, why would we table it?
Well, I guess we've talked, I mean, there's been some vague references to the facilities meeting, but I don't know, is the facilities meeting our committee going to meet in
Project committee?
project committee and talk about it?
Well, I really think the next role of the project committee will be, once we have some conceptual designs to look at and go through and say, yes, we like that, no, we don't like that. Otherwise, we're just really shooting in the wind. Because we can talk about the elevator, well, we can have those conversations at the same time. Realistically, so we had our bond sale today, and we did really well, by the way. They expected us to come in at like 3.7, and we came in at 2.5, so that's really good news. But
That's
one of
really
the
great.
documents that we received this afternoon was, they want to know before we can establish the closing date, when the bids are going out for the projects, what's the timeline that we're looking at. So if we put this off later, we just continue to push all of that back, and right now we're hoping to have a November 1st closing date. If we put that off, obviously that's going to move back our closing date on our bonds as well. And I'm just not sure what what's gonna transpire within the next 2 weeks that is gonna make a difference there.
So would we feel more comfortable going forward if we established a meeting with the, either facilities, if we decide to pull this into the master plan and use the facilities group, or we use the project committee that we've already established, that we had used to get to these projects? Will we feel better about going forward if we established a meeting of that group
Yeah,
with Rob?
I thought the
right
project
now?
committee would have been involved in defining the scopes to a larger degree, not the nuts and bolts, but the overall. I mean, I'm not sure what the media centers look like. I'm not sure what's the other big one, the safe security entrances. I'm not sure what they look like. And I think if you come back with proposals or design elements in 6 weeks, then I'm kind of 6 weeks behind everyone else. I'd rather be up front with that than behind, I guess.
What would help you, you mean like going to the buildings and looking at them yourself, as opposed to the professionals looking at them, drawing up plans as to what those could look like and giving us suggestions, and then having those those jumping off conversations about whether that design is what we want it to be or not?
Well, who's we? I mean, are we
We.
entrusting
The
the
district.
administration?
The board.
The
To
district.
speak for the board, I guess, is, because, and I guess.
Ultimately, ultimately, those designs will be brought back here, and whether that's the whole board or that's the project committee that is looking at those, and it may be the project committee first and then bringing them to the whole board, those will be, you guys will have the final say on all projects as they proceed.
Would there be any
going
benefit
forward.
to the project committee or the facilities group gathering sooner than later with, I'm kind of with you, I don't know what I would even say until I had something to react to, but at least having some conversations about elevator. Priority would be freight. Priority would be, you know, or at least we would like to see it here, here, here. Would that be helpful?
Scopes are so vague, I'm not sure what the design firms were given. And you're saying, I don't know what our idea of a secure entrance really looks like. And I would like to be,
So that's
brought up
what
to
maybe could
speed.
happen in that.
so if we can do that before we have a design, I'd be very appreciative.
Okay.
Well, I would say that, so Rob has, and the managers met with each group to talk through more of what those scopes look like. As far as what secure entrances are, there's an industry standard, if you will, now, that this is what they do. And so they're gonna
the
bring us those
concept.
recommendations of what that should be or what that should look like, as opposed to us saying, well, we like, you know, we want 2 doors and we want it to be secure as they come in, so they're not buzzed in until they're cleared to enter the building. I think we really need to be able to react to what their suggestions are to us, as opposed to, I don't wanna sit back and say, these are the things that I think we ought to have in a secure entrance, because I don't know what the industry standard is. They do. So we're asking them for their expertise on that.
I think I think some of the problems or concerns, it's not really problems, some of the, let's call it blue sky. We're gonna have, I mean, these are fixed bids anyway, fixed fees anyway. So I think as long as we're involved in the beginning of the process so we can understand how these are defined, I don't think it's gonna change the contract cost. And I don't necessarily have a problem approving moving forward with the conceptual design, talking with the architects and stuff like that, but maybe in some of the initial meetings, the whole board, if they want, or the project committee, maybe we can be in some of the conversations with the managers, Rob, and the architects, and then let us all have kind of like a round table, so we all can understand it. Maybe that would be,
Yeah.
That would
I
be
think
in the
that's
probably-
beginning.
that's a
I think the other
compromise.
thing is we need to define which ones are the ones that needs to, like the roof at Dennis, that's the roof at Dennis, you know? I mean, the
I don't
parking lot,
think anybody's
that's the
concerned
parking
about
lot.
that, right?
right.
So if we're talking about secure entrances, if we're talking about the elevator, if we're talking about the media centers.
Yeah, there's gonna be, you know, the mechanical, I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty cut and dry on some of it. I
Yeah.
mean, I got some questions about the temperature control piece, but, well, it wasn't really kind of designed that way, but,
Okay.
But I mean, I agree with you, that's, yeah, but the ones that are cosmetic, the ones that we are doing for the students, the medias, I got certain ideas in my head. You know, a student center, what does that mean?
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know, Media centers, what are we providing? Entrances, you know, those types of things. I think those are the cosmetic ones that we have the concern about.
And Bill Payne would have no issue with driving over here and showing us what they're looking at, what they're thinking as they begin that process and going through that at all. Matter of fact, he offered to be here last board meeting, and I told him I didn't think it'd be appropriate at that time, or would there be any benefit to that. So he's more than willing, as he's demonstrated already, to come and do whatever we need
So
from him.
if we just establish that going forward, that early on, before they get too deep into this, that we are, and I don't know about the rest of you, but could be as many, I guess, as need to, although then it becomes a public meeting, right? So do we need to stick to?
Well,
I don't even know if
the
that-
project committees, they were public.
Oh, good point.
He
Maybe
could
we
even
had
come
him
and
there,
present at
so-
Yeah,
the
good
board
point.
meeting.
Right.
So we don't
That's true. Could
have
be
to
at
have
a board
another
meeting.
time. I mean, he could come and present here.
Okay, so let's just.
The ability of the board to pre-design the project is quite limited. If you think back, look at Vail and look at Star. In 2000 and 1997, we did a lot of cosmetic work there, and it looks great.
Right.
But from a security standpoint,
Right.
in today's world, in today's safety standards, it's atrocious.
Right,
And those standards change over time, and I don't think the board can necessarily think that it's up to speed on what
No.
the state of the art is in some of these issues.
no, just a matter of like hearing what that
What
that might look like, what they're saying that might look like,
Right.
being able to go, does that mean we have to, and I was, and now we have more information on the security system that
and
you're
with the
talking
Raptor
about, so,
system, that
yeah,
needs
so
to
thinking
be-
that
that
through,
needs
what
to be
that
part of
looks
the
like,
discussion.
exactly.
Well, and I want to say, as a former teacher, that I still would like to see if, on the elevator part, I would still like to hear from the people who actually use the facility. For the media centers, I would like to hear from the people who actually use them, because there's been things done in the school system, and no one ever checked with the teachers, and then it was done, and it was totally unusable.
Right, so we're talking,
So-
they're not media centers, right, they're student centers, that's a little
The
different.
Well, at the
student
two
centers.
intermediate, it'll be the media center.
I
so
got
it's
you,
a high school
I got you,
Yeah.
I got what you're saying, I got
Student center.
But I would like to hear their input on their needs.
So I just think with some communication, I think some of the concerns can be eliminated.
I think so too, yeah. Does that make sense, Rob, do you
But
understand?
that's not gonna solve Brad's,
No,
but at least it'll,
before they get too far along, we can kinda hear what they're thinking and,
and my only concern is since it is open, since it is loose, I just, you know, we're approving contracts somewhere around $200,000 in total. I just wanna make sure
stay on
that-
top of it.
that we stay on top of it.
Yep, I don't disagree with that. All right, so that being said, all those in favor of approving the contracts with LWC and Fanning and Howie signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Isn't that supposed to be nay?
Nay.
Actually, usually they do
Me
same
either.
sign, so it works,
They said that to me one time, Brad, so.
Abstain from voting. I'm just,
What does that do?
I'm not voting.
Then his
You
vote
wanna poll
turns.
the board, it's a little
That,
confusing.
that might cause us a problem then. We're gonna poll the board, so
I
Jeff,
said yes.
aye,
Not voting.
abstaining,
Aye.
aye,
Aye.
Brad?
Nay.
Nay.
So you have
That's
four ayes, one nay, and the abstention goes with the majority votes. so
Goes
there's
with the
five
majority
ayes.
vote.
All right, I appreciate that, thank you. Okay,
But I love the discussion. I think it's
Me
great.
too.
Yes,
Me too.
yes, thank you.
okay, so, our next, it blends very well into our next step then.
Yes.
So,
So
we're-
our work session this evening, we're bringing back structure for the working groups, which is really, a lot of it is summary of the discussions we had here at the board table. The document that is on board docs really breaks it down into the different groups with board members' names listed, cabinet names listed, directors, administrators' names listed. then teachers with ideas there, and then also parents and community members. The one that is at your desk is the one that I included in your board update Friday. Had some of the names of members of our community that we had thrown around as possibilities, which is part of the reason why they're not on the public side of the documents, because we haven't even talked with them. And again, they were just things that we threw around as people who represented different groups within our community that we thought would be good to have involved with it. So from our discussion, we had talked about establishing the 5 different working groups as we go through the next year for master planning. So the first one was the educational planning working group. The next one was marketing. The next one was facilities. Fourth one was finance, and then the fifth one was, there was the 4, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the recommendations for community members. So anyway, there's the 4 there. Underneath the educational planning working group, what we had talked about here at the board table was looking at groups of a group of about 30 to 35 board members. Debbie, Dixie, and Aaron had volunteered to be a part of that. Cabinet members were going to be Chuck and Jennifer. Directors, Mike, Corey, and Sheila. And then you can see the administrators there. And then we were looking at adding 6 teachers, 2 from each level, and bringing them to be a part of that. And then for parents and community members, we went through, and the way that we came up with 17 that's listed there, we really tried to identify all of the different partners that we have that help with our kids after school programs, if you will, but then also looked at like government, official, chamber member, EDC, higher ed, and then parents, again, 2 from each level, and tried to look at it there. For marketing, we kind of did the same thing again, just kind of laid it out, trying to talk through the different groups, making sure that, again, board members, and I know Brad mentioned today that he would like to be a part of marketing. That's fine. And I think that may change, and there may be some shift with interest as we get into this as to who wants to be a part of what groups, and I think that's up to the board and really each of you which groups you want to be a part of.
And
then
may change with the election as well.
That's
could.
the truth.
Yeah, it could.
Now, are we gonna go through each section?
Yes.
Because part of what I thought you were coming back to us with is kind of like a defined scope of what we were doing in each of these committees. So are we?
Yeah.
Are you listening to what we're doing now, then coming back with the
Right, so
proposal?
what I'm gonna do is just talk through where we're at, but then now go back to, and I think the scope of them are all pretty, we talked through quite a bit at the last board meeting, 2 board meetings ago when we went through this, to really look at what those are gonna be. But for instance, with the educational planning working group, so we had talked about looking at grade level configurations, we had talked about curriculum, we had talked about the different things that go along there. What are the different topics that you, as a board, want to see to make sure that those are covered in there? And I think that part of that is we can continue to work through those as we move forward, once that we establish that these are the groups that we really want to move forward with. And if you think the structure of those is appropriate as well, because I think part of this, while we've got an idea of where we'd like to go with it as well, we being administration and the board together, as we've looked at all of the information and participated in all the meetings we've had over the last year and a half, going back to the beginning, we've got an idea of that, but I think we also need to include them and just hear from them as well, so that we go into it with hey, here's the jumping off points, but are there additional things that we want to address as we go through the different groups?
So does anyone see any issues or missing pieces with the structure?
Well,
I thought the structure was.
Well, yeah, the structure in itself is, when you went to the 6 teachers from each level, or a total of 6 teachers, 2 from each level, but then part of that is I'm assuming that we're going to be talking about program evaluation, stuff like logos, Project Lead the Way, those types of things. So, so should we also have representation from people in those different programs that we have in our system? I mean, how do you expect to write, I'm going to use the word scope, and we've been using that word a lot lately. How do you expect to, I'm really interested in the governing document that this committee has to how are we going to go about evaluating our programs? For example, logos has been a discussion. What format are we going to use? And then if that's going to be a point of discussion, then we should have someone from logos also representing that. Project Lead the Way, early college. I mean, there's others I just can't think of right now, but we may have more programs, then we'll have positions for teachers or people who are involved with programs to represent. I mean, especially if you start thinking about the Career Center.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, we need to add a CTE element to the educational planning working group, especially with the state's new emphasis on the graduation requirements.
So my recommendation would be that as we go through it with this structure, that then when we get to that point where we're evaluating programs, that then we include those representatives into those conversations, rather than try and, because now all of a sudden that group has grown to 50, 60 people, and trying to get them there on a regular basis. And so I think
right. I understand that.
part of that will be that evaluation of programs, and I think that that's something that as we go through this process, that then we pull in, we look at the different groups, Jeff, that you've mentioned, Brad, that you've mentioned, and talk to them as a part of that evaluation of the program. Alternative ed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The adult ed. I mean, really, when you start getting into it, you're right, it'll continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, that's why I think it's so important that we really have a defined, I could see it easily get just overwhelming.
No question.
That's what I was gonna say on, well, really on all these, we have a broad category, and you could go all over the place. So under educational planning working group per se, what exactly are we talking about? Grade configuration, CTE? I'd like to see a more defined list
Can we do that?
so that
Can we
it
take-
doesn't just,
Well, yes, but I also think that part of this is rather than me and cabinet directors trying to say what that's gonna be, I really think that, so when the educational planning working group, again, if this structure looks like it's gonna work, and again, this can be an ever-changing document, but the board members who are currently a part of that, Debbie, Dixie, Aaron, Chuck, and Jennifer, Mike, Corey, and Sheila, can get together and really sit down and brainstorm what are the things that we want this to do. And then, once you have that parameter set, that jumping off point again, then when we bring in the others, we can say, so this is where we're at. Let's talk through what else needs to be included with that. So that could be the evaluation of programs, that could be curriculum, that could be offerings, what are we, and all of those can come together in that. But I would like for that work to be done by those people that are included in that group so they can take the ownership of it. And as Jeff said, it really could become overwhelming and unlimited as you continue to look at everything. But let them be the ones to really focus that as to what that needs to be.
Yeah, we've got 12 administrators, so we got 1/3 of the group assigned to this, over 1/3 of the group assigned to this administrators. So could we increase the teachers or specialists in some of these other areas to come up to equal percentage?
We can increase the ask for teachers.
Well, right, I understand we can't mandate it, but I mean,
but that can also get unwieldy as a group.
We
with
did
that
expect
many.
this one especially was going to have to be subcommitteed probably multiple times. I mean, it would have to break up into smaller pieces which is very much how it went with the last time we did this.
But I think it might be an
There was
easy.
the big group, and then it chunked off.
I think
That's
it might
really
be
where
an
you'll pull
easy-
in a lot of teachers once you start breaking in those other groups.
It might be an easy way, though, to add someone from the Career Center, or someone from early college, or, you could add 3 or 4 of those.
But is that how would you do it to the whole, or would you say, hey, once they break up, like Todd just kind of said, if the group decides, these are the chunks that we're gonna work on, when the subcommittees get created, is that when you pull in? Like you're starting to talk about,
Possibly,
GT,
yes.
then maybe that's when you bring in a little more. If you're starting to talk about career ed, that's when you bring in more of that, to that subcommittee versus the,
Yeah, I don't see
Bigger.
that group really doing anything with 35 people. I mean, other than creating smaller groups.
right. Which is why we even, when we talked about it initially, that's the only reason why he said that one was gonna have to be bigger, because it was gonna have to segment off. There's no way.
Yeah.
That it would, well, that's what we had to do before. You had to be able to, we broke off full-day kindergarten, we broke off, grade configuration broke off into a group, so they could do research more focused. And I'm trying to remember what the other ones were, but I remember grade configuration, full-day K.
Well, actually, I guess teachers would be 8 if you do 2 from preschool, 2 from elementary, 2 from.
Right.
Well, and I kind of had the preschool elementary together, but, so here's where we come back to, though, and I think, this is one of the pitfalls when you go through processes like this, is that it becomes so big that
Yes.
meetings don't mean anything, and then
No
if they're
question.
not gonna mean anything, then people are gonna quit coming.
No
Right.
question.
And
I agree.
Jeff,
That's absolutely
your point is well taken, that, we need to increase the number of teachers. Again, I think we could do that as we break it down and look at the different areas. But John, your point is well taken, that with a group of 30 or 35, how the heck are we gonna ever accomplish anything? And so I really think that that's where this group needs to get together and really sit down and come up with the norms, if you will. What are the outcomes we're looking for? What are the areas that we're going to address? Because we could get into a million different things that we need to focus on, the things that came out of the first round of community meetings, and let those drive where we're going.
So are you seeing them getting the entire committee in place and having a meeting? Or are you seeing like the school personnel and the board members getting together?
Yes.
Getting the jumping off point sort of settled, making the asks and the invites, deciding what the subcommittees are, going from there? That's what you're
That's
trying.
exactly what
Okay.
I see taking place.
That
So
makes
the
a little
board
bit more
members,
sense
cabinet directors
logistically.
getting together, administrators possibly, but then creating, where do we go from here? What are the outcomes? And again, that's gonna take spending some time reviewing all the documentation that's on our website from the process that we've gone through thus far. We've got a lot of great
That makes more
documentation.
sense.
We've got a lot of material there, and if we, if we don't use that, I think, again, people have invested time in that, so we really need to use that to drive where we go and as we move forward with it.
And that's where you can have conversations, Jeff, like, okay, it's supposed to be from each level. What if we strategically, if you're picking, if you're asking to high school teachers, that group of board members, administrators, say, well, how about if we first ask this one and this one, because they would represent CTE, they would represent Project Lead the Way, they would represent whatever. Maybe that's where you get more strategic about which faculty you ask.
Well, the group then, because Dixie just made the comment, like I did, about making sure that the committee has a narrow, defined goal. So then this
absolutely.
group then is gonna have to do the same thing for the subcommittees.
Agreed. Yep. I
So,
agree.
it's gonna be as challenging for the committee to create those defined goals.
Agreed.
And then, I guess then we'll just leave it up to Todd to have the responsibility to make sure all of those goals are aligned, at least in a similar direction.
Well, or it comes back to backing with recommendations based on what these committees
Right.
came together with, back to this group as a whole going, okay, yep, that makes sense. Now they're starting to join together. I kind of get that.
Well, and some of the defining comes from, like he said, it does come from what we heard from the groups we met with last year. And so we need to look at those first. That should be the starting point, because you're right, if you don't use people's input, then they're gonna say, why should I
Well,
be
and
involved in anything else?
Well, and the input matched, I mean, it matched what
Yeah.
we knew we were looking for. I mean, so
Right.
it's really, obviously, it should drive it, because we knew that's, you know, we knew intermediate was something we were gonna need to focus on. That rang true, and so it is aligning. It feels messy, and I get it, but it's going to, because it's a huge undertaking. But it's going to start feeling less and less messy as we get going. And I think, I get it. In my head, I wasn't thinking it was going to go that way, but now I do, I get it. Where now the groups of those that you know you have can get together and do a little organizing and suggesting of members and fine tuning. I kind of like that. That's not what I saw, but I kind of like it.
Now, are we gonna require, I don't wanna use the word applications, that's not the right word, but I mean, how are we gonna go about, are we gonna,
I think you addressed that on the second page, didn't you?
So one of the things that we talked about, Jeff, I think where you're going is with the recommendations for community
can you
members.
read my mind?
So what we'd like to do, complete appointment form with rationale, and that's mainly for board members, like if you know someone, and I think, Jeff, you brought up, for instance, Ron Mays working with the facilities part. And so it's not gonna be a real detail, but just to make sure that you're not thinking Ron, John's thinking somebody else, Dixie's thinking somebody else, and all of a sudden we have all these people that board members are saying, hey, and by all means, we want you to, to make recommendations, because I think it's gonna be key to making sure we get the right people on here. But that way we don't cross over and have all from one segment and not from another. So it would be a simple, hey, this is who I think we ought to have be represented or be a
And
part
why.
of this, and why.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it wouldn't be a huge deal, but just so that way we can make sure that the group makeup matches what we agree upon as the working group
Being
layouts
as
that are here.
diverse as possible, and
Right.
yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing that I think we need to revisit, one of the things that we had talked about was that there are certain parts of this that need to take place right now and certain parts of this that would take place later. So for instance, the educational planning working group, we had talked about getting that started now and moving forward with that. The marketing, we'd looked at, maybe we wait a little bit on that one. Facilities, a lot of this is really going to be, when we look at the next round, if we do another type of bond issue in a year or two, whatever that ends up being, if we look at, when we look at remodeling the high school, what is gonna be involved with that. So we had talked about that was maybe something that could be a little bit later. And then the finance really will be that next time that we have those bigger concerns coming up. But again, that is just what we talked about at our last board meeting where we discussed this. So we just, need to get the feeling from you guys as to where you're at with that right now. Would it make sense that the educational planning working group starts immediately?
Yes.
I think so. Marketing. As I mentioned in our update on Friday, we have a really incredible opportunity, and we'll talk more about that. I'm not at the point to be able to talk about that publicly at this time, and that I think will really feed into this whole marketing piece, and could be something that, as we get into January, February, could be a big part of what's going on there. Facilities, where are you guys with that as far as, we've got the group of the board who's meeting, the project group, that'll meet to really go through
I can
what
deal
we
with
just talked about.
current stuff, yeah.
But does, our thought was with this, that looks at that next round and moving forward with that. So that would be a delayed thing, maybe spring of next year. But again, that's open to discussion and your guys' input as to where we go with that. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, I could see, especially with the work that we got going, or that we're gonna have one. I think the facilities group could actually start.
Would you, because I thought about that too, but in my mind, I was blending the current project committee in with this.
I was too.
And do we need to do that? That's my question.
Well, I think from a board from a participant level, at a board level, it's pretty much open to any board member that wants to be involved. We're not gonna limit on
Right.
any of the committees, any of the board members.
Right.
But I think we talked about after we get through this first year, we're looking at it possibly with our finances that, may afford us the possibility of doing another $5 million bond in, 18 months. It would sure be nice to be creating a wants list, a needs list, and,
Well, we also talked about the fact that because we're in a different situation, that these current projects really kind of should be blending into the master plan, I guess.
Well, and I was
because-
gonna say, the educational committee may be coming back with some changes that
Mhm.
may take some of the allocation if we decided to do that second bond. And as far as the high school renovation,
Mhm.
I can, sometime next year, starting that is not out of the question.
Well, and you've already created a project with the student center
Mhm.
that should be included in the master plan, so, I guess the, idea of, because if the group that sits here, meets to sort of set the stage like you are with others, and it decides that we don't really need to grow it until this time, but we
But
need to
we
set
could
the
start to-
stage.
We could start to define what,
And include, like I
the
said, the
scope
current
is.
projects into the scope. We're loving that scope word, but, sort of getting those current projects into the full scope, because as we talked about that, it's like, it was, if we were doing this several months ago, we would be even doing the current projects that are on the table, so, and it changes, the way we might approach the future by the fact that we can do the current projects, then they're gonna be coming off of whatever the big plan is, because they'll already be done.
and depending on how far you wanna take it, we're gonna start having, capital projects money become available,
Exactly,
so there's a
yeah.
whole nother,
Yeah.
a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan is not a bad thing. I do have one comment about parent/community member section, that category in any of the committees. I just really would like to make sure that those individuals that are represented there, I would really like for them to have some direct impact with Richmond Community Schools. If they're, like, of course, Eric Marsh would be, if we would invite him because of media and reporting, but I don't wanna go to Indianapolis and grab a person that's not, that's not associated with the community. So, I wouldn't wanna go to Centerville and grab someone that's not associated with.
Well, parents would be parent of students.
Right, but you've lumped that category together, parent/community member, so I'm
You
just
want them to
talking
be
as that
connected
group.
to
And
Richmond
our thought
schools.
with that was that hopefully we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone
Right,
and get parents who are actively representing different community groups that work with our kids and our schools. Just trying to get the most bang for the buck.
that's what my only comment is, just I want to make sure that those that are on the committee have some
Connection.
connection with
Right.
Richmond Community Schools.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so
Agreed.
verbalizing that and making sure that that's, but then that can be addressed when you do like your application or your,
I
recommendation.
really don't like
sheet.
using that word, but you know.
Recommendation
Yeah,
form,
recommendation.
how about that?
What'd you call it?
Appointment
Appointment
form.
form, I like that.
That works better. Yeah, I like that too.
I'm pretty sure Chuck came up with that.
Go to,
Well,
look
then,
at
wait a minute.
Chuck.
Let me-
Chuck's over there, yes, I did.
He's like, let me pull that back off the table. No, I don't like that.
So if we go with facilities, look at starting that early 19. I mean, we're already in the middle of October. So,
Be fine.
okay. And then the finance one,
Same thing, probably. Unless Karen has something that's coming up.
and I'm not sure we'll even have anything early 19 that, so let's just wait. We'll go spring of 19 and see where we are with it. If that works for everybody?
Well, unless you want to get deeper and have the group understand the new operational educational fund, and then there could be some conversations.
Will I be able to?
I think finances
Just
in
switch
particular is
positions.
towards
No.
remodeling and as opposed to just overall.
You're gonna have to say
for the
that again,
building.
'cause I
But
missed
it also, would that not be capital projects?
It would, the way that I envision the finance piece of this working is not necessarily our day-to-day budget, because that's your role and my role. But it's for future planning, it's for future projects. The piece of it is until the facilities are determined on what types of projects we wanna look at, then the financing part comes after that, because you have to know how much you have to look at in order to go that next step. So I was kind of envisioning using it more for that than maybe understanding the dynamics of our budget accounts. Everything is public record, but the general public doesn't have interaction with our budget accounts.
True.
And
No, that
so
doesn't mean
that's
we don't
something-
need to do that.
Exactly, and I
We
think that,
probably will
I
need to
mean,
do that.
we already know we have to have conversation on the budget, transferring what that change looks
Right.
like before the end of the year. So that was just my vision for this, was how to make us work, better and smarter, you know, looking at all of that from that option standpoint.
Okay.
Because some of the financial piece won't even be relative until we start talking about that next stage,
Right.
maybe.
Maybe. I could see where I could stretch the two, but.
I can see that too. Mr. Slifer.
Well, and that's gonna be the hardest part for me is we're not trying to, as a board, enlist a bunch of other people to help us do our daily stuff. This really needs to be honed in on the master plan.
Right.
And so,
Well, right,
Project
and
committee
that's
will
where my
meet.
tie-in is.
I'm-
My tie-in
I'm
was
going
capital,
that way too.
was capital projects.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
we got this bond money, we got the potential next bond money, and we got the high school.
But
we
that's
got
where the board project committee would probably be.
I guess as a board member, I've not had the ability to think of having
know,
available capital
it's
funds.
a
So
weird-
that's like a whole new pot for me to think about.
I agree with you. That is a weird place to be, or it's just odd for us to be there, so
It's
that's,
exciting.
it is exciting, I agree. A little overwhelming, as you said, but.
But I, you know,
Okay, so we'll move forward then with, trying to establish a meeting with the Education Planning Working Group, in the near future.
I would just say, I mean, I guess I wouldn't, I don't know, I forget the conversation as to why deferring the marketing, but it'd be nice if that team was up to speed sooner rather than later, I guess. I would go forward. I don't know when you're thinking, you said put that off, I don't know if you're thinking 19.
We said spring 19, so
I mean, I would.
I'm
bring it
hoping
to that
spring comes early.
Educational committee.
Not that far away.
Yeah,
Can
we
you
may wanna
create-
get that
can
one
you
moved
Winter is
create
coming.
up quicker.
Dang it.
can you create an intro document to the educational, I mean, you're gonna approach people and ask them to be on this committee, how are you gonna,
Well, I think
what
that's
are you gonna say?
That's what we just agreed, that we're gonna have the board, cabinet, directors, administrators get together and work through what that, narrowing that scope to come up with what that is going to be, based off of the information we've already received.
And that's where you'll be able to say, and we are asking you to participate because one of the main missions is X, Y, Z.
Or we're
So-
gonna be looking at
Yeah,
these
yeah.
4 main focus areas,
Yeah.
or whatever, 3, whatever it ends up coming to. Yeah.
All right.
Well, if we put the time and energy in, this could be a strong thing.
I'm excited about it too.
It really could be. Could be a bad thing, or if we do it poorly, but it could also be a strong thing
Yeah,
if we do it well.
I'm actually excited about it, cause like you said,
It's gonna be strong.
it was overwhelming at first the last time this happened, but once it got clipping along, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so good. and being able to do the research again, people struggle because in some ways you can find research to support grade configuration, for example. You can find research that would support any grade configuration pretty
Absolutely.
much.
Absolutely.
So then it becomes, okay, we like that, but does it fit in the buildings? And then getting to that point was really, really fun.
Good.
Okay, that brings us to board reports and old business.
I don't have anything there.
I don't either. Next meeting I will have some more on our policy though, before next meeting. Policy.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Why did we get these here and one at home? Because that's wasting money.
I have no idea.
Probably ought to
I didn't
ask
get
about
one here.
that.
I didn't get one here, Dixie.
I didn't get one here.
Just a special board.
I think your
members got
identity's been hacked. ASBJ.
Well, I wonder if the one I got at home.
Don't accept
Didn't
that.
get one at home, though.
Dixie, don't accept that second or third friend request, okay?
Turn down all friend
You've been
requests.
cloned. Yeah, I'm not sure, Dixie.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good thing to ask though, so, cause I agree, that's a waste of time, money, paper, resources.
I'm pretty sure we don't pay per copy, we just pay our, so if it's a waste, it's on there and for
Let's-
duplicated services, but,
Maybe we can pay less next time.
yeah, hold your breath.
All right, how about preview of upcoming meetings and events?
So, exciting thing tomorrow night, we've got the Taste of Wayne County going on, and we will be there with a booth, sharing information, and strategically, like last year, we are located at the front of the serving area, so everybody has to come right through us to get their tray to go get their food. So we'll be there. It's just a great opportunity to interact with hundreds of people and share with them the exciting things happening in Richmond Community Schools.
Where is
The other-
that?
What's that?
Where is that?
It's at the fairgrounds, Coleman Center, tomorrow night, beginning at 5 and
that
going
the-
until 7:30.
It's the Raper Center.
Raper Center.
Raper Center, I'm sorry, it is in the Raper Center. Thank you. The other thing I wanna, and I think, I've already talked with Suzanne, I think she hit up Aaron and Brad. So next week is fall break. You hear that? That's everyone screaming and hollering with joy and excitement. But because of that, most of the people in this building are not gonna be here.
Go to Florida.
So we will try to have everything uploaded on board docs by Monday of the week before the board meeting. I know that's later than normal. People aren't here, it's kinda hard to get stuff put on there. We're gonna try and get as much of it done beforehand, and we're gonna have our agenda meeting Friday morning. So Kim will still post what we have available on Friday afternoon, like normal, and then we will update that with as much information as we can on that Monday. Intentionally, our agenda will try to be light, simply because people won't be here to get that work done. So, that is all I have.
All right.
So, our adjournment and bell ringer.
Almost
If you
rang the
guys
bell
have been
before
paying
you
attention, we've been doing super things, going through our buildings and just identifying the many cool things that are happening throughout our district. And today, we have one that I want to bring your attention to. And this really highlights one of our programs in the Career Center, but actually it highlights two, because it's with our automotive group, but then also our TV and radio students, as they put together, did all the filming and the editing, and we appreciate, they go with us weekly. So Bridget finds different things going on from talking with our principals, and then she and I and students go out and we shoot these different super things that are happening around our district, and then the kids go back and edit it. So if you guys would roll that, please.
Look at you in there.
Hello, I am Todd Terrell, Superintendent of Richmond Community Schools, and today we are at Richmond High School for another version of our Super Things in RCS. Today we are down in the Career Center, and I'm going to ask our Career Center Director, Mr. Rusty Hensley, if he would tell us a little bit about what we're going to see today.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. It's always exciting when people come down and check out the programs we have to offer. Today you're going to be in the Automotive Lab, one of our 18 programs here at the Richmond Area Career Center. And for a little more information, Mr. Summey's going to tell us what we're going to see today.
When you get to check out the shop today, what you'll be able to see is you'll be able to see suspension work in progress, as well as many other training opportunities for our students. We're blessed to have it, but most importantly, let's take you out in the shop. Okay, this is Zach and Charlie. They're going to give you your tour today. You'll be able to view what we do on a daily basis in automotive. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Todd Terrell, Charlie, and Zach, and they're going to explain, essentially what this place means to them.
So one of the things I'm going to ask the kids to do is they talk through the program, what we're going to see today, but then also is tell us what their future plans are and how this helps get you to where you want to be once you're out of high school.
My name's Zach, like he said. This program to me means it's there's a lot of opportunity in it. I took a college class over the summer for free, and I'll be able to graduate high school with a technical degree in college. And this will help me further my future because I would like to join the United States Army. And there's potential that I can get a pay bonus because I have that college experience already because of this class. And this class has just taught me a lot about, basic needs for cars, so I don't have to take it to a shop. I can work on my own car by myself and not have to pay an arm and a leg for.
My name is Charlie, and my plans are kind of just take advantage of the opportunities that we have. It's not only a family, the program itself, but it's so much opportunity. For example, we have a lot of kids that are co-opted out to different dealerships like Wetzel, Honda, all kinds of different, even beyond just automotive, but agriculture as well, kind of like John Deere, New Holland, all kinds of stuff like that. My hopes is that I'm gonna graduate with my technical certificate, my associate's degree in automotive, and then I'm gonna take that and become a service writer, or hopefully a service manager at one of the dealerships here in town.
Explain to him what he's going to be doing. I want you to show him in virtual view. I want you to click on showing toe so he can see it.
So right here's the toe. What we're doing is adjusting the toe. And what is the toe? Just move the tire in and out.
Show him with your hands.
So how it's along? Straight or angled a little bit one way or the other? So it looks like we're all over here. So what we want is that a big deal? Yes, yeah. That's a big deal. What happens if I left it like that? What's that? Tire wear. Tire wear. No. Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do is jump on the gear.
It's called the jam bolt right there. You can tighten up against the tire iron. See it's connected to the tire iron as well. And the tire, when it's tightened up, it won't allow the tire to spin.
Just like you don't know exactly how to adjust your taper, your toe, your caster, you can actually just click on these little wrenches right here and you can show them the adjustments. And it can actually show you exactly what you can do.
They're going to show you how to take the tire off. What I really wanted you to do, they stalled as long as they could because they had patience that we go. We have these two arms that are specially designed, and they're like, it looks alien, man, these arms. Install tire without design. Because nowadays people like to look at their hands and tires. There it is.
Talk about Subaru.
We actually have many sponsors. One of them being Super. They have donated over $250,000 to a program, including multiple cars. They have donated 6 cars to us, one being a European style car, which is pretty cool. The steering wheel on the other side. And we're looking, hopefully, that they can give us a brand new model of a Super car so we can work on the newer technology that are in vehicles nowadays.
Our partnership with Subaru is beyond just the hands-on, but also a lot of the technological, like Zach said, a lot of it is also like our European style and different kinds of different things that you see on Subaru that you wouldn't see on a lot of the American cars that we have here. We're very proud of our partnership with Subaru, and we're very thankful because without them, we wouldn't get a lot of the training that we get in. So hopefully we continue that partnership in the future.
So once again, this is one more example of the super things happening in Richmond Community Schools. I'm here with Charlie, and she's one of our students, and we just are really impressed with the different programs we have as part of our career center. And you can check all of these out online. Visit us at We Are Richmond, and you can go to the high school and see more information about it. So again, hashtag super things and RCS.
It's my crown. It's my crown. Thank you.
And that's so cool. And everybody, if you have social media accounts, I would like to encourage you to find it and share it with the people that you're friends with, because that's going to grow our story. And if you have multiple identities on social media, just share it with all of them, since we're all being cloned and duplicated.
I'm lucky to try. We get close to 1,000 views every time we put something out, and We're actually leading the state in Facebook interaction for schools, Bridget? Engagement?
That's right, so out of all the schools, districts in Indiana, Richmond Community Schools is number 1 as far as engagement. That's pretty cool. It's one of the things,
you,
though, that I answer that question probably at least 6 times a semester, is anybody offering shop classes anymore? I'm sure you get it too. And the other one is, all schools should say the Pledge of Allegiance every day.
We agree.
And I always have to respond, we do. When's the last time you were here? But the shop class question comes up all the time. And I always say, it's not grandpa's shop classes, but I guarantee you need to go check it out. So for people to see that video or those kinds of videos is really critical, because they're operating on the last time they were here or in a school. And I think it's really important for them to see what's really happening.
It's cool to see little kids doing flashlight reading on Fridays too, with the little kindergartners and the
Very
fourth
cool.
graders coming down. And yeah, there's just so many really cool things happening.
Well, and part of that marketing group, I mean, we have to get more people in our schools to see how they look and the kind of things that are going on, because it's really impressive.
These kinds of things, I think, will help people want to do that if they see it and go, oh my goodness, because every time I answer that question, I get someone going, I had absolutely no idea.
When you said you were doing the chamber thing again, is that gonna be again?
Yes, so we're planning one in the spring, and we're hoping to do one in the fall as well to add
Good.
the second one too.
The
so-
Chamber Network Night.
Right,
Nice.
lunch.
That was very good, very
Yep.
good.
And the Richmond Realtors.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yes.
the Realtors is critical.
that's what
Very
we're
good,
hoping to do in the fall here. Yeah.
very good. All right, we are adjourned.